It's been a good Sunday. The Spirit of God, if He moves anything like He did the first and second service, buckle up, Buttercup. It's going to be a good one. God's been blessing. It's been a good one today. God is moving in some wonderful ways. Lots of prayer. Today we're going to take a look. We're in the second message of the sermon series. Love. What does it say? Love has a name. Love is more than a name. There it is. Love is more than a name. And today I'm going to be jumping into love is more than a theory. Or love starts with a theory. And as we jump into this today, I want us to be grabbing hold of how it is that God's name moves us into the very thing that He's calling us to when we just don't seem to be able to make it. When we struggle and we believe He's called us somewhere, but we can't get there. And we're disappointed and we're hurting and we're struggling in so many ways. In Matthew chapter 22, if you will pop it up there, 34 to 40, we're going to hear how Jesus unpacks this and makes it come alive for us. And reading in Jesus' name. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees and Pharisees, they got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. All the laws and the prophets hang on these two commandments. This is like a spiritual welterweight fight. The first round, we saw the Pharisees step up and they asked the question about how should you deal with the money? How should you do your tithes and offerings? Because they heard Jesus saying something very different than what they were teaching. And so Jesus pulled out a coin. He said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. And the first round, the Pharisees got knocked flat on their back. Round two, the Sadducees decided to step up and show the Pharisees just we're going to teach these guys. It was kind of like a big competition between the Lutherans and the Assembly of God and the Baptists and the Methodists and the Presbyterian. Like, okay, let's get our turn. We're going to get in there. We're going to show them what we're all about here. I know it's not that way, but it kind of was that way with these Pharisees and Sadducees. They were trying to get their movement, their church, to be the church in town. So the Sadducees stepped forward and they're like, all right, the Pharisees, they got whooped up on something furious, but we got a question for you, Jesus. Because Jesus, he had a big crowd and people were starting to follow Him. They wanted to be part of his ministry. And so round two, the Sadducees asked their question about life after death and angels, and Jesus answered it. And then they tried to do another trick with marriage at the resurrection, and Jesus, He flattened that one as well. And the Sadducees, they got taken out right at the knees. There was no wiggling there. And so the Pharisees, they thought, let's give it one more shot. So the Pharisees, they got up off of the turf and they come and they said, Jesus, one more question. And they asked the question about which law is the greatest. Of course, you just heard my reading of how Jesus responded. Jesus takes all of these rules and commandments and He makes it really, really easy to understand. Really, just love God and love your neighbor. Simple, right? Aren't there 613 more rules? I mean, the Pharisees knew that there were literally, this is true, there were 613 rules and they had to follow them all. Now Jesus just brought them down to 2 rules. Well, how hard can that be, right? I mean, anybody can keep 2 rules. First off, who doesn't want to love Jesus? And secondly, love your neighbor? I mean, that almost sounds fun. Yeah, love the neighbor, no problem. I mean, hey, if Mr. Rogers can do it, we can do it, right? Yeah. In theory, this loving people thing, it sounds great. Sounds like, yeah, I'm all in. This is going to be good. This is going to be easy. But when you really think about love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and this is the first, and the second is love your neighbor as yourself. When you really think about it, it's a deep drink of water. It's a big task. This is simple in theory when you hear about it, when you think about it, but to actually do it, it's quite something else. Loving people and loving your neighbor sounds so straightforward. If this is all it takes, if these are the only commands and all the others hang on them, then the Pharisees and Sadducees, the people that are listening, they're thinking, I think we're going to be okay. We can do this. Now, as Jesus is saying this, who is the object of this love in order to make this all happen? Well, Jesus here, he's doing a little bait and switch because for most of the people in the crowd, they really believe the object of the faith which they have, that object is really, it's them. But Jesus is, he's going to point out and he's going to give them a deeper teaching, a deeper thought that the object of your faith needs to be me. Because if I'm the object of your faith, what's going to happen is you're going to start being stripped of you and you're going to be clothed with my robe of righteousness. You're going to be given everything that I have, and you're going to not be leaning on your own understanding, but you're going to be leaning into me for all things and all matters, and it's going to start making a huge difference. So why does the Lord deserve such adoration? Well, it's his name. Remember, this sermon series it's about a name. He was the covenant God brought back. That name, Yahweh, all the way back in Deuteronomy, Yahweh equals Lord, Lord equals Jesus. His name, Yahweh, is the one who is the covenant maker, who brings all of mankind back into the covenant with God. It is through Jesus the Lord, and we see this happening in John 20:29, when Thomas has I could have a V8. Are you kidding me? Thomas, who is a Jew, who'd understand the Old Testament, he clearly could see it. He walked with Jesus. He was a disciple. He should have got it, but he didn't get it. And after the death and resurrection, Thomas the doubter, Thomas that had to touch the holes in his hand, the hole in Jesus' side, Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." He says, the name Lord, Yahweh, is the very name that brings everything back together from Genesis, where man fell out of harmony with God and God brings man all back together. But Thomas now is dealing with something. As all of this is like, it's clicking. Thomas is like, so easy, but yet so far away, because now what he knows is that Thomas is being called to step out and tell all of these people in every land, far and near. He's going to tell them the story about what he saw with his own little two eyeballs, about this man named Jesus, who was perfect, who walked, who lived and he died, he gave his life. Thomas now is being called to tell the story of Jesus to everybody. To the haters and to the people that are dying in need of need of hope and mercy. In fact, Thomas is having this aha that if I have to go out and I have to tell the whole story of what I just watched Jesus doing, this is going to be messy. Why? Because at that very moment in Thomas's mind, as he's called to go and to share the good news of Jesus with the people that don't know Jesus, he's understanding that love is messy. Proverbs 14:4 says it like this: where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but from the strength of an ox comes an abundant harvest. What's this saying? Basically, if you want to have a clean barn, if that's your biggest goal, you want to have a clean barn, then don't put any animals in it. Just don't expect an abundant harvest. In other words, if you want an easy, problem-free life, where you don't have to go through pain, where you don't have to have struggles, where you don't want to have to enter into relationships so that you don't have to get burdened and hurt and worried and broken, where you don't have to be offended one more time, if you want to have an easy life, a problem-free life, then just keep all people out of your life. Have no relationships. But like Proverbs says, don't expect any benefits either. Now, I know some of you are wondering, do you have to love your neighbor if they leave trash everywhere? Some of you are wondering, do you have to love your neighbor if they're selling drugs out of their house? Do you have to love your neighbor if they have 27 cars parked in their driveways along the street and in their front yard? Some of you are wondering, do you have to love your neighbor if they have a different orientation, nationality, different color, different belief system than me? Do I have to love those people too? And the truth be told, the scriptures say, and I think we know the answer, love your neighbor, finish it with me, as yourself. So the question is, who is your neighbor? It's everybody. It doesn't matter. It's not just Christians. It's not just certain kinds of Christians. It's everybody. Again, loving people in theory sounds so easy, but in reality, it can get really messy, really quick. Love is so much more than a theory. So how did Jesus love? That's the question. Well, I want to take a moment here to just be candid with you. And as Martin Luther would say, one of the best ways to help someone get a point is to sting them with the law. And then the gospel it's like a neon light. It glares at you. If I may, let me sting you with the law. Maybe some of you won't say, well, no, it's not me. Okay. But let me just be candid with you for just a moment. Oftentimes when I look around the church and the lives of other Christians, including my own, everything seems to be nice and clean. Don't get me wrong. We like to talk about the Bible. We like to wrestle with theology. We like to talk about scriptures. We like to pray with people. And for the most part, a lot of us, what we do is intentionally focused, and that's good. It feels good to do your daily readings and prayer, and you should. It feels good to attend to worship services, and you should. To give your tithes and offerings, to volunteer in children's ministry, nursery, be a Sunday school teacher, adult or children, to be an Awana teacher, to be a VBS teacher, to help out, to be an elder, to be a trustee, to be a deacon, to be a deaconess, to be whatever, to be a pastor, to be a missionary, to be whatever you're doing with what God has given you. It feels good to do that, and you should. However, we can so easily become comfortable with all these things that we start to form our own comfortable little holy huddles. And then we start to slip into a mindset of being blind to a world that's lost and dying and needing good news, good hope. The issue is that our good and godly routines can keep us from interacting and experiencing with others and what others really need. In other words, we can start to become, in our relationship with Jesus, very religious in the routine order of how we do everything, in and out, going through the motions. And when we go through the motions, it's like the blinders come on and we quit seeing. The scales get thicker on our eyes, and we don't see the people where we once were, where what we came out of. We don't see those people in the same way anymore. And if our faith never moves us to action, then we may want to reconsider our faith. James 2:14 really lays it out, I think says it best. James 2:14 says, "What good is it, my brothers or sisters, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. And if one of you says, 'Go, I wish you well. Hope you can keep warm and fed,' but does nothing to help their physical needs, what good are they? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accomplished by action, then that faith is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I'll show you my faith by what I do.' You believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe and shudder. You foolish man. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did." Goes on to talk about that. Take a look at Galatians 3:19. gives a deeper picture of what a foolish man can look like if really all he has is religion, but he doesn't have anything beyond his religion, where he's stuck in just wanting to be in the holy huddles, but he doesn't have any way to reach out to people who don't know Jesus, he's unwilling to tell people about Jesus. Paul said in Galatians 3:1-9, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Jesus was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by observing the law or by believing what you heard?" Stop, verse 2. Remember what I asked you, that Jesus is the object of your faith? That's where it comes from, verse 2. You see, if Christ is the object of my faith, then I'm going to be looking into everything I need from the Word of God, and it's going to be pouring back into me. It's going to strip me of all of the things, all of my selfish, wicked desires that's going to want to feed my attitude, my pride, my selfish desires, all of the things that's going to take me away from the things of God. It's going to just get rid of the old man, and it's going to put the new man on. That's when I'm pouring myself into the object of my faith, which is Christ. That's good. But too often what happens is I start pouring myself into the object of my faith in what I do. I do a good job going to Bible study. I do a good job going to prayer group. I do a good job coming to church. I do a good job I'm going through all this. And blessings come. They do come. Don't get me wrong. But we wonder what's going on. We all like to talk about the Bible and wrestle through these theological interests, and it all feels good. However, we can so easily become comfortable with all these things. And for a lot of us, we've got nice houses, nice lawns, we've got nice sides of town that we live on. We're separated from the dirty, messy, difficult things of life. It almost seems as if the longer we follow Jesus, the neater, the cleaner, the more sanitized our lives become, and we just live with a greater boundary, a greater barrier between us and those who struggle. Yet in many ways, this appears to be very different than the life that Jesus lived. Do you remember last week he interacted with Zacchaeus? And as I was talking about Zacchaeus, Jesus walked up to Zacchaeus up in the sycamore tree. And then when Jesus speaks to Zacchaeus, remember what I told you last night? When Jesus spoke the name Zacchaeus, salvation came out of his mouth. Salvation pulled Zacchaeus down. Salvation entered him because Christ spoke his name. And when he got on the ground, he was full of joy, the Bible says. He's full of gladness. He was so full of joy and gladness, he said, "I'll give half of everything I have to the poor and needy, to the widows and the orphans, and anybody that I ripped off and stole from, I'll give 4 times the amount." That can only be a work of the Holy Ghost for someone that's been converted and born again. And Zacchaeus was on fire for the things of Jesus. Now, how did that happen? Well, it happened because Jesus asked Zacchaeus to come down, and Jesus invited himself over to Zacchaeus' house for dinner. Jesus frequented the table and the homes of many people that religious holy men would never see themselves around, never be caught with that person. I wouldn't be seen with those folks. But instead, Jesus went to those people. Jesus hung out with the people that other people tried to ignore. He learned their names. He listened to their stories. He shared meals with them. And he challenged them to love, and he challenged them to truth. And my dear friends, when you're at work, when you're sitting there talking to your friends at lunch, and you're going back and forth about how the weather is, how this, how that is, then one of the best ways to start talking about God is challenging them to love right and to speak truth. You don't even have to mention the name of God. And trust me, they will evoke the name of God if you push them to stand on love and truth, which is what Jesus did. Now, some of the people Jesus crossed paths with, they didn't magically clean their lives up. In fact, many of those people never did become good Christians. After meeting Jesus, they stayed messy, some of them really messy. They kept meandering around, and what did Jesus do when he'd see them? He articulated the same thing. He gave love through his action, and he kept loving them and pouring his love onto them and loving them to the cross. Because Jesus knew it was the Spirit of the living God that was going to draw them into something that was going to be good and real. It wasn't just a theory for Jesus. It wasn't his reason, or it wasn't his motive to just pass them by and not to be part of their world. It was his reason for being and living and moving in and through their lives so that they could come in contact with him, hear the good news of Jesus. And some of them responded in ways of faith so that they could walk and follow after him and be his disciples. Now, my dear friends, I want to share one thing with you. God is working on you. God is stirring in this place. He's calling us to step out of who we are in the old man or old woman and step into who we are as the child of God. And as God does that, God calls us, he calls us to step into the messy. He calls us to be men and women of God. And you see, I got something up here, and I just want to share a little bit of what this is. Last night, before I went to bed, my wife, she went and got me some ribs. And so I said, dear, thank you. I need some ribs because I'm gonna do an object lesson here, and I think it'll be a good learning lesson. And so here we are. Got my ribs. And, nice cough drop there. Anyway, we are called by God to step out in love and to do some things that normally we would never do. When we are called to step out and start loving our neighbor, we're called to step out of our comfort zone and to go into areas where we never would go. And we're called to talk to people we'd never talked to. And we're called to start telling them about what Jesus has done in love and truth. And we're called to get messy. Now, when I started making these ribs last night, I had to put a lot of spices in and this. And, I was like, how do you make these, dear? And so she'd given me all the recipe to how to do it. And we cooked them all night long. And she said, don't you know that when you're eating this in front of the congregation, it's going to get messy. Like, you're going to get your fingers all messy. You're going to get it on your mouth. And I said, I know. That's what happens when you're eating ribs. They're good. You can get your fingers. I'm getting all my fingers all dirty and my mouth. And this is what it's like to leave this place today and to go to talk to people that don't know Jesus. It's not going to look perfect. You're not going to do it perfect. But it's not about you, is it? It's about the object of your faith, who's Jesus. He did do it perfect. And so, like a good rib, your ministry is going to be messy. Yeah, so who cares? Good ministries that are messy are often really good. They really are. And they're exciting because my wife sent these too. They're really good and they're exciting because get the juice up my face, because it's like every one of you, if you've ever had some good old-fashioned barbecued ribs, you know that there's no way to eat them and stay clean, and they're messy. And to love others is going to be messy. But if we're called into what God calls us to do, our ministries are going to look very much like C.S. Lewis when he said that there's no safe investment. To love it all is to be vulnerable. God calls you to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly get wrung out. And possibly your heart will be broken if you were to love anything. For some of you, you've experienced that with divorce or the loss of an old boyfriend or girlfriend. Some of you have experienced the loss of children. Some of you have experienced the loss of your business or a job. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart. If you want to be safe and secure, C.S. Lewis says, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it up carefully in hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglement of relationships with anybody. Lock your heart up so it's safe in the casket or at the coffin of your selfishness, and then you'll be safe in the whole world of of a lonely existence. Lewis has verbalized the reality that many of us live in order to avoid the messiness of love and relationships, but God says, I want you to get into the mess. I want you to get barbecue sauce all over your fingers and your lips, and don't worry, just eat it to the bone because I'm going to bless it. And just like eating barbecue ribs, there's no way to stay clean. If you're going to love others and you're going to get into ministry, it's going to be messy, it's going to be dirty, and it can be overwhelming and frightening to consider the cost of a relationship, but it doesn't have to be that way in your brokenness. If you keep your eyes on the object of your faith, He'll deliver that person right where He needs them to be. You stay faithful and ask the two questions in truth and love, and let Jesus perform the results. He'll bring it to a helpful conclusion. You say, well, where do I start, Pastor Shawn? I'll do it like this. Mother Teresa, she said, never worry about the numbers, never worry about how many people you've helped. She said, help one person at a time, and always start with the person that's closest or nearest to you. Love stops being a nice theory when we start loving the people around us, when the theories turn to action and we see our weaknesses on full display, but we also see the power of God working through our weakness. And when we see our weaknesses, don't be ashamed of them, don't run from them. Use the object of your faith to point out your weakness and share with the world, share with the person that you're talking about Jesus with. See me. See how broken and helpless and hopeless I am? But God uses me. He uses all of us broken people. And then what God will do is He'll help you to love that person. Say it's your wife. Say it's your husband. Say it's your child, an adult or a younger child. And you put Jesus on the backside and you love Christ through that person. And you allow the Spirit of God to work on that person. Just see Jesus on the backside of that person. Love Christ through them. And let Him draw them in. Let Him speak to them in a way that only He can. And maybe this is the way it's supposed to be, my friend. I mean, if Jesus can leave His heavenly throne, take on a humble nature of a servant, live and die to reconcile us all to the Father for the rest of eternity, then I think what God really wants to do is He wants to give us permission to get a little messy and go back to people who we probably never would talk about or talk to, and stand in love and stand in truth. And watch what God does. Because when we start doing that, God starts moving. Last week I challenged you to learn someone's name. Did you do that? This week I want to challenge you to take the next step. I want you to love someone near to you as you would love and care for yourself. I want to challenge you to buy a stranger a cup of coffee when you'd buy yourself one. I want to challenge you to become a mentor or a foster parent to somebody's friend who maybe lost a dad or a mother. I want to challenge you to come alongside of an adult. I want to challenge you to befriend an addict. I want to challenge you to reach out to someone who hasn't talked to you in a long time and they've been on your heart. I want to challenge you to pay for someone's groceries. I want to challenge you to feed someone. I want to challenge you as you feed yourself to buy someone a lunch today out at a restaurant or somewhere else. I want to challenge you to love broken people, so that you can start a relationship with them. Because I have a feeling for many of you, you've experienced a little bit of love in your life. But for you to do what I'm challenging you to do, I'm gonna have a feeling that many of you really have no clue what I'm talking about. So I challenge you. Make Jesus the object of your faith. Use the things that you're most ashamed of to lift Him up. And do something that would be out of your comfort zone. And as you do that, God's going to push you deeper and deeper into a call through His name. I'm going to just wrap it up here, but many of you have heard my story many times about how when I met my wife, she could have easily said, "Be gone, little man. For I'm a PhD student and you aren't even a kindergartner yet." And even though I was offended and I told her, "I'm a Christian," truth be told, looking back 30 years ago, I didn't know Jesus. But she got me going to Bible studies. She had me talking to people, and before I knew it, I found myself surrendering my life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And she was nice enough, before we even started dating, to take me to certain little events, to hear a speaker here and there. And she one day she said, "Shawn, I want to take you to hear a missionary." I said, "A missionary?" I'd never heard a missionary speak before in my life. I didn't really even know what they did. I think they went around the world talking to people, but who am I going to hear? She said, "There's a woman in town, Fargo. Her name is Elizabeth Elliot." That was the first time I saw this kind of love being spoken about. And as Elizabeth Elliot started sharing and talking about the book that she had written, it was a book about the life her and her husband had down in Ecuador. They went to minister to an Elka tribe in Ecuador. Jim Elliot, her husband, they were in Bible school and they were young and they had a few little children, and he was on fire for Jesus. And he and 4 of his best friends, as they were in college, he told them, "Guys, I really feel like God is calling me to go to Ecuador to go minister to the Elka tribe." And so his buddies got on board, and when they graduated, they went to an unreached group who had never been reached for Christ. They landed in Ecuador, they made camp, they started making their life, and they had been there for, I don't know, a time, 6 months, a year, I'm not sure, but they were making some inroads, and they actually had a few conversions, and God was starting to do some great things, and the chief and the leaders of that tribe got nervous and worried. And one day when Jim Elliot and his friends were in the river, washing and doing things in the water in the river, the tribe surrounded them and they killed him. They speared him to death. Elizabeth, his wife, told the whole story of what it was like to raise their children without daddy. And she said, all I could do was press into Christ and believe that he could do it for me. And she said, the more I pressed into Christ, the more God was calling me to go back to the Elka tribe in Ecuador and to carry on the ministry that my husband had started. And so she said, I responded to God and I went back to Ecuador. As she shared those truths that night with the whole huge crowd, she taught me what forgiveness was. She taught me what the power of love and grace was in the face of adversity. She taught me what it meant to lean into the powerful promises of God and to trust him. She talked about this. She helped me to understand that one of the very last quotes that her husband left, he said in his writings, Jim Elliot wrote just before he died, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." He is no fool to give what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. My dear brothers and sisters, you cannot earn God's love. You cannot earn God's love. And you cannot lose it. And God is calling all of us to step into that beautiful place and to believe and trust that he is calling us out to go. Maybe across town, maybe to the coffee shop, maybe to your neighbor, or maybe to Ecuador. But God has a call on every one of our lives. Amen. Let's stand and respond to God's word today.